The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Hey, welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell. It's a new day. It is now Friday, the 29th of July in the year 2016 here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. To one and all, the weekend is here. I start celebrating the weekend on Friday because I look forward to doing whatever my wife tells me to do on the weekend. Yay! X-Zone Nation, before we get back to the show, our first guest this hour is Our first guest this hour, we only have one guest this hour, thank you, is Dr. Gibbs Williams. But before we get to Gibbs, a couple of messages I have to talk to you about. The first of all, Leo Ashcraft, our good friend, is just getting out of the hospital, I'm told. So I know that all the members of the X-Zone Nation are going to send love, light, and the very best wishes to Leo for a speedy recovery. Leo, we love you. Take care, old friend. Later on tonight, after the 2 o'clock hour on the TalkStream Live network, as well as on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, Dr. Susan Kolb is going to be on the show talking about the naked truth about breast cancer. Rob Phillips is going to be talking about paranormal tech investigations. Michael Fox is going to talk about the Fox Family Paranormal Team. Diane Lawrence, IMPS. Mike O'Neill is talking about Odyssey Paranormal Investigations. Zach Roden is going to be on the show. He is a philosopher. And Philip Solomon, the UK's #1 psychic. Now, these are all shows that we've taken out of the X-Zone vault to share with you, the insomniacs of the world here in America. But who knows, on the other side of the world, you may be just driving to work. You may be in your office. Wherever you are, we are so happy that you are part of the X-Zone Nation. As I said, my guest this hour is Dr. Gibbs Williams. He is a psychoanalyst, author, supervisor, and instructor in private practice in New York City. And for the past 40 years, he received a Bachelor of Arts from Columbia College, majoring in philosophy, an MA from Yeshiva University, and a Ph.D. from New York University. His choice of profession is an outgrowth of 4 major interests: philosophy, depth psychology, spirituality, and the esoteric occult. He was an assistant director and psychologist at the Odyssey House, a pioneering therapeutic community for the treatment of heroin addicts. In this connection, wow, there's those gremlins again. Hold on, I think I've got something here that would take care of those gremlins once and for all. God, they make a mess when they're splattered. All right, back to Dr. Williams. He's also the author of a new book that we've talked about here on the show a couple of times with Gibbs, Demystifying Meaningful Coincidences and Synchronicities. His website is drgibbswilliams.com. And Gibbs, welcome back to the X-Zone, my friend.
Pleasure, Rob.
Gibbs, the last time you were with us, we talked about synchronicities and coincidences, and then I believe it was off-air or just towards the end of the interview, you started telling me that you had also done some work in the UFO field with one of the abduction cases.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, when did I do this? It seemed like centuries ago,
yeah.
And how did I get involved in it? And I put a few things together. It was probably in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
In my coincidence thing and attending a spiritualist church, I met some very interesting people. Among them was a woman who was a scientist and also very much interested in my research in synchronicities. And she, I'm not sure if she was a member of or she knew about Bud Hopkins and the Intruder Foundation.
Right.
And she introduced me to him, and I just loved him instantly. He found out I was a psychoanalyst and invited me to be a member of the group as a psychologist and come anytime I wanted to and listen to the meetings that they had on a monthly basis. And I think it's frankly hazy in terms of how much I actually did, but I attended many of the meetings. I was fascinated, and I developed a very keen relationship with Bud, who was just an amazing person, artist, and as you probably know well, with his Intruder Foundation with the abduction thing. And I used to go out to lunch with him and pick his brains and try to come to terms with, is this guy the biggest fraud in the history of the world, or is he for real? And what is going on here? And it was a totally fascinating experience.
Based on your expertise as a psychoanalyst, Gibbs, after investigating the cases that Bud worked on, how would you explain what was going on? Were these people actually physically abducted, or was this part of a psychosis?
Well, it's interesting. When we talked today and you invited me on the show, I thought to myself, I honestly, it was sort of hazy, and I had kept some notes. Among the things that I did was to interview Linda, and anybody who's in the abduction field probably will appreciate that her case is, I think, unmatchable, the Linda Corteil case.
Yes.
And I interviewed her, gave her some psychological tests and so forth. I was very much interested in trying to figure out what's really going on, what's real, is it illusion, and so forth. In any event, you invited me on, and I figured, well, let me try to recollect my memory and see what I can do. And then I panicked, and I thought to myself, I'm going to make a complete fool out of myself. I should have some material around, and I know that I had written a paper about her and looked for it and applied all my appeals to faith in the unconscious, and that all failed. However, good enough, I came across a paper that was written, and anybody who's interested in this should write this down, by Sean Mears. And let me give you a present. Write down thelindacorteilcase.com, and you will see a fantastic website on abduction cases featuring Linda's case, which is really outstanding. And I looked over that paper. It's rich, but even richer, and I'm about to make an apology. Near the end of Bud's life, he said, I have stacks of letters from all over the world, Australia and a lot from the United States, you name it, of people who have read my book, The Intruders, and other books, and they have written to me to tell me of their experiences, and many of them are looking for counseling, and they are, really often a lifelong sense of trauma and trying to figure out, is this real or are they crazy? And a lot of them can't really speak to anybody because they felt they were going to be laughed at, which they did. And he gave me these letters, and he said, please read them, and if you want to, respond to them. I apologize. I took those letters, and I had every good intention of looking through them and answering them. I didn't do it. I was negligent. I read the letters for the first time, and it's about 20 years ago. Oh my, are they loaded with interesting material and what am I going to say? Maybe I can read part of it and give you the flavor.
Sure.
The people, I'm trying to answer your question in sort of a roundabout way. Let me give you my conclusion. I've gone through various phases. One was, this is ridiculous. Two was, well, why? And as I sat there listening to these people, a highly intelligent group, very empathic, most of them had very good careers, highly intelligent people, and I thought to myself, these people are not lying. I suppose they could have collective delusions, but they sure are convincing if that's what they are. And I've gone through, as I said, various phases, and if you sit me down today and say, all right, what do you think? I would think I have to have an open mind. I don't know. I don't know. In any event, in reading these letters, it is amazing how all over the world, with people who do not know each other, how many of the experiences that they had with, like, the Greys, and you all know, anybody who's in the UFO thing understands, you know, the rap and the experiments and so forth, that they have a remarkable similarity. On the other hand, when you look in the general population at any one time, there are things in the air, like, you know, most people know about ETs and they've seen movies and so forth, and you can have a collective delusion, and why not? But in terms of what's really real, the fascinating thing that I tried to pin Bud down was, what's your evidence? And very near the end of his life, he came up with things that were really quite amazing. You know, like the metal pieces of metal that often people had in their noses, and scars from seemingly operations in which baffled doctors and so forth. So once again, I don't know. But if you get to the facts of the Linda case, that is a mind-blowing story. So I guess, again, the answer to your question is, I'm open. I don't know.
Can you give us the synopsis of the Linda Cortiel case?
I will try. It's very complicated. I did sketch a few things. Let me read you the first part of this letter.
Okay.
It's the best way to do it. This is from Sean Mears, who gave you the website for. The letter starts, or the paper starts. What's the most unbelievable UFO claim of all time? ? UFologist would pass an amusing afternoon debating that, would it be George Adamski's saga, or perhaps the supposed installation deep under Dulce, New Mexico, where aliens are said to store human body parts. But if I narrowed the inquiry and asked for the most unbelievable story ever vouched for by a major UFO investigator, I can't imagine there would be much disagreement. It would surely be the Linda case, which Bud Hopkins describes in his book, Witnessed. And when I call the case unbelievable, I don't mean that we shouldn't believe it, although there are plenty of people, including some ufologists, who most certainly don't. Instead, I'm using the word in its most informal sense, the sense I'd use if somebody told me that my elderly aunt just became a race car driver, and I replied, unbelievable. Consider what Hopkins asks us to accept. Here's the story. To begin with, he tells us that for the first time ever, a UFO abduction has been witnessed. Linda Cortiel, and that's a made-up name, the Linda part is real, a housewife who lives on the Lower East Side of Manhattan with her husband and 2 sons. Cortiel isn't her real name. Was supposedly soon after 3 o'clock a.m. on November 28, 1980, floating upwards from her apartment to a brightly glowing UFO accompanied by 3 of the standard gray aliens. One witness, though it isn't published in Hopkins' book, even says he saw tears running down her cheeks. And, most importantly, there were witnesses. One, Hopkins says, was a retired woman he calls Janet Kimball, who was driving across the Brooklyn Bridge towards Manhattan on her way home to upstate New York after a late party. In letters on the phone and in person, she told him her car had stopped, and along with other drivers, the scene she describes was quite chaotic, with people honking horns and shouting in dismay. She watched what she first thought, was a movie being filmed, although she quickly realized it couldn't be. That sounds reasonable enough. Cortiel's apartment is very near the bridge, but the other 3 witnesses send the case reeling into pretty wild territory. Now, each sentence adds like, wow. Two of them wrote to Hopkins, introducing themselves as New York policemen who had seen the abduction from a car parked under the FDR Drive, a highway that runs along parallel to the east side of Manhattan, facing Corteil's building. That wasn't the whole story, though. Later, they revealed that they were security officers working for an unnamed American agency and guarding a man Hopkins described simply as an international political figure, but who is widely known to be, ready for this one?
Yeah.
Perez de Cuellar, at the time Secretary General of the United Nations. And it goes on and gets increasingly more complex. And then these two men who presumably were exceedingly entangled in this rich tapestry by the name of Dan and Richard, who turn out to be Cuellar's, if it's the facts, his guards, and it becomes a story that is unbelievably intricate. And to make a long story a little bit shorter, all of these people seemingly were involved in previous abductions. Linda and Richard and what do I say? What's his name? Dan and Cuellar and others. And they have a set of adventures, and it eventually involves Bud and trying to figure out what's real from what's not real over a long period of time.
So after your investigation, or after your participation with Bud, the Intruder Foundation, and speaking to people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials, as well as the many letters that you've read, what is your take on what really happened? Were they abducted, or was this all part of a fantasy?
Well, this goes back to the heart of my 50-year research in the trying to understand the nature and uses of meaningful coincidences. And just a digression that I think is important to do justice to your excellent question. I got steeped in Jungian psychology, and of course people who know this understand that Jung and his followers probably represent 95% of all of the believers in synchronicities from a theoretical point of view. And I was steeped in it, and it made a lot of sense that it's partially, these messages are composed of two parts. There's an internal part, and of course there's an external part, which seem to be meaningfully related, but you can't see any actual cause and effect relationship, so that Jung concludes they are scientific anomalies and that you really cannot prove them through causality, and adopts this, what I think is a kind of silly principle called acausality. It's got to have some kind of cause, we just don't know what it is, but he wrote it off as essentially unexplainable in terms of common scientific method, and you just have to accept that. Well, what's the external part? From his vantage point, it connects with a concept he calls absolute knowledge, which is based upon some kind of, I guess, consciousness, universal consciousness, and that it's essentially a Platonic philosophy in which everything is essentially connected until you're born, and then you become, as a self, disconnected, and your job is to reconnect and make a unity eventually with this archetypal consciousness. Now, this is all well and good, and it's very seductive, and it's very much in the air now, and it's very much promoted with the idea of everything's connected. Yeah. And I cynically thought to myself when I started to hear this stuff, well, good Lord, I knew that in the 9th grade. When you know what's the world composed of? Atoms and molecules, and of course everything's connected. So what? Well, the so what is that these messages are experienced as if they come from some external realm of experience, and a lot of people feel that the world is essentially spiritualized, and you're making some connection with some kind of spiritual enlightenment, and you channel this knowledge, and it's for your own benefit, and so forth. Well, having been a philosophy major at Columbia, but also a divided self, and seeking, hoping that Jung was right, there was this war going on in me between the wishing to be, I wish there would be this kind of universe, but another part of me, the skeptic, said, "Oh, come on, get off it. You know, this is not real." And people, you know, they like to say that people like Freud are reductionistic and science is too materialistic and all that. Well, yeah, well, fine. Too bad. That's what it seems to be. So I had this war going on, and Jung upset me because he had what he thought were three irrefutable principles that one involving meaning, time, and methodology. This is getting to your question. And what I did in my 50 years of research was to take each one of these seemingly irrefutable questions and did research on each one, and I believe came up with an apt refutation for each one. The central being method. And here's the answer to your question. It is very, very difficult, as you know, or any researcher knows in this field of anomalous phenomena. There are many different anomalies, but they all have together a commonality that it's really hard to pin down. And and you have to be able to use scientific method by experimentation and repeatability and so forth. And with synchronicities, they're like firefly flashes, and they just happen, you know, out of the blue. How are you going to pin them down? Hence, you can't do it. Well, yes, you can. And I discovered that in my work as a psychoanalyst, that if you look at these so-called messages, you start to ask questions such as, let's say they are messages from some external realm of experience. All right. There's got to be a messenger. And you have to try to understand what the message is. And then you get into all sorts of questions of, well, who's the messenger? What, these are dead people from, you know, or master teachers, or even the idea of absolute knowledge. What does that mean? And why are you getting the messages? Why are you so special? And when you get these messages, what do you do with them? And as I kept asking questions and exploring, I used my knowledge of psychoanalysis and realized that these things can really be interpreted like waking dreams. My bottom line theory is that they indeed are messages, but they're not coming from some kind of external source. They're coming from you. That people are generating these messages and actually creating or discovering synchronicities, which essentially is taking a coincidence and attributing special meaning to it. And from my vantage point, the special meaning, in effect, is an answer to a seemingly unsolvable problem. That's how it starts. And if you keep on looking for answers, you will find that you start to pick up clues like pieces in a complicated jigsaw puzzle, and you put these pieces together and you form a pattern, a recognizable pattern, and that pattern is a synchronicity, and you have to interpret it like a waking dream.
Gibbs, stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our brief break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Dr. Gibbs Williams is our special guest. www.drgibbswilliams.com is his website. We'll be back on the other side of the short break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network and TalkStream Live Network. Welcome back, everyone. Before we get back to Gibbs, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with yours truly, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey K, and every other minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, and that's courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone app or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, New Age, thought-provoking, educational, sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Gibbs, is it possible in today's society that aliens are replacing religious philosophies, since everybody was expecting the second coming of Christ? He hasn't made it yet. Maybe the aliens have. Could this be part of the global phenomenon when it comes to UFOs and ETs?
I guess if you can conceive of it, why not? Getting back to your question, how do you objectify the truth of this stuff, which is really the key to understanding? My point that I think something needs to be done that I don't think, unless I haven't read all of the material out, but I think research is going to be best served by putting any of these anomalies into what I call contextual analysis. Now, what's contextual analysis? Take a group of, let's say, abductees.
Right.
You can either, I guess the surface research would be pay careful attention to their stories, take them seriously, try to have an open mind, try to at least know what your biases are and don't put it on them. Bud was particularly good with this. He used a lot of hypnosis, but and I watched him do this, he was very careful, unlike many hypnotists, at least the ones I know about. He was very careful in not giving them, not leading the group, and he would often say things that were lies, in order to test people. So, for example, in the Linda case, he was able to get a number of people who seemingly saw this thing happen, and they would describe that it was very dark. And they saw this lighted thing, and he would say, well, I understand the place was really lit up like a Roman candle, and they would say, no, I think it was really dark. It was stuff like that. He would purposely twist the material so that it would be like a test to see if they were really just taking his suggestions or they really had independent thought. That's another way. That's a good check. But since, and you put your finger on it, since this stuff, obviously, any of these things have to start with a self. And the self is perceiving some kind of data, which they are ultimately interpreting as some kind of anomalous phenomena in which they will often react to with either amazement or the uncanny or in awe, or certainly putting their hands on their heads as if to say, I don't have the slightest idea what's going on. Now, of course, if you're faced with this kind of phenomena, it can be really traumatic, and the trauma is you don't know the difference, or a lot of these people, they really don't know the difference between fantasy and reality, and many people, of course, are scared out of their minds with any kind of stuff like this, and they don't want to hear it, or they tell them that they're crazy and so forth. So it's really hard to objectify and get at a climate where you can even begin to get a sense of whether this is true or not. All right, but then there's even a deeper level. Since we know from Freud and Jung and other psychologists that everybody has an unconscious, and of course that seems to be where things are going with respect to all these phenomena, consciousness studies, or really what is consciousness, and then what's unconscious. In very simple terms, to my best understanding, what we call the unconscious, whether it's the personal or the collective, is experiences which essentially are not spoken. It's pre-verbal experiences that feel as if they have an enormous amount of impact and a lot of meaning, but there are no words connected to it, so they're highly, you feel a lot, but since you don't speak it, it's more of an emotional experience than an intellectual experience. And a lot of effective therapy, no matter what the brand is trying to convert all of these feelings into language that can make boundaries and there's a sense of reality. That's very important. All right, and so what's that got to do with your question? Let's say you have a group of 10 abductees, and I was part of a number of these groups. What did I find? I said that they were highly intelligent, they were affable, they seemed to be believable. I don't think there were any fakers, there were no con people, and there was a certain pattern that would arise. Among the things that I found that were, I think, interesting from a psychological point of view were that practically all of them that I interviewed in some kind of breadth and depth first started having these kinds of weird experiences around the ages of 5 to 8. Now, psychologically, that's not unimportant, because from 5 to 8, this is a time where anybody who has any sensitivity to being alive starts to catch on to things like, my reality is bigger than my family. As a matter of fact, my reality extends to the stars and the planets, science. The head starts to awaken, and you start to go from your narrow interests to curiosity about what makes things tick. What's the nature of reality? Kids become philosophical, and they start to be appreciative of questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? What am I doing here? Is there a sense of purpose? And not too much beyond 8. In much of our, at least I think much of the education, probably worldwide, a terrible phenomenon occurs. We beat all that curiosity out of our kids. We take it away from them.
Yeah.
We overload them with things they're supposed to do. Instead of promoting their curiosity and interest and passion, we get rid of it. So you take what would be a curious mind that would start to really evolve in this area, and you completely obliterate it. I know I'm making an overgeneralization, but you get the point. It's terrible. So what am I talking about? It's a time when creativity, 5 to 8, maybe earlier, maybe somewhat later, is blooming. What's creativity? In my way of thinking, the creative process is a combination of 4 or 5 streams of information, intellectual or ideas, feelings, intuitions, bodily sensations, perception, and maybe other things.
Right.
Each one of them being like a stream of information, and all these streams of information are additive. Nothing contradicts anything. It's like, and if you can synthesize them, and the more you have, the more objective I think you can become about having a true experience of whatever an experience of experience. And it is the closest we as human beings, I think, can come to really trying to understand the nature of anything that we study. In that connection, if you throw in things like abductees are often having their first events around 5 or 8, and you look at, well, what are the events, and what did they experience, and whatever, and you begin to get a narrative that, since the storyline is the very idea of being abducted, and abducted by what? Aliens, strangers. Well, we know you don't have to be. Kids have, for example, fantasies of when they first start to have a sense of from their family, and they start to ask questions. There are many kids that have adoption fantasies. Even kids who are well loved, they begin to have a sense of, well, where am I from? And you get into all sorts of things like karma and past lives, and kids who are alienated and have really poor homes can be predictably generate feelings of I can't believe that my home is so bad. Or I've done something terrible. That proves karma. It must be that I did something awful, and that's why I'm so miserable. And or, what if I'm adopted? What if I come from some other home? Well, it's not so far-fetched then, if you have a particular kind of personality structure, to have, and you latch on to this idea of alien abduction. The abduction is, first of all, it's an adventure. It's something out of the ordinary. A lot of this is kids of that age, they love horror shows,
yeah,
and trying new things. You get the point. In other words, each one of the things that they talk about and are interested in could conceivably be viewed as normal development for a particular child that has this particular sensitivity. All right, what does that all mean? I don't think the experiment has been done, and it would be, I think, really interesting to be able to see if you can have groups of people in which you get a detailed narrative, particularly starting at that age, from 8 to 10, and get a really in-depth indicator as to what were the most striking events in their lives, and generate details which give you a chronology, particularly in that age group, and apply it to any anomalous phenomenon. And my hunch is you would begin to get patterns in which it would not be a coincidence that, for example, people who were attracted to like Bigfoot, or alien abduction, or flying saucers, or you name the anomaly of the moment. The odds are very strong, I think, that it is not a coincidence that you're going to be, attracted to a particular anomaly to begin with, and the people who are attracted are probably going to have certain personality characteristics that are going to almost predispose them to be interested in a particular anomaly. What I'm really saying is this, I think, is the way to try to objectify something that's really hard to pin down.
Is the child's belief in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and all the other fictional characters that we adults instill in our children, and then as they grow up, we kind of say, you know what, we've been lying to you all these years. There is no Santa Claus. There is no Easter Bunny. There is no Sandman. Would this be an example of how we actually set up children to once again live in a world of fantasy, and that alien abductions or whatever you have, as you said, the flavor of the month when it comes to the unknown, could this be an indication?
It's a great question. I have, I think, a really good response for you. There is a psychologist by the name of Bettelheim who wrote a very important book called the name of the book. Essentially, it had to do with fairy tales. Where do they come from, and what are the uses? Was it the uses of enchantment? I think is the name of the book. It doesn't matter. Look the man up, and you'll know what it is. He said, if you destroyed every Grimm's fairy tale book in the history of the world, so new kids coming in have no reference to these things, ultimately, the same fairy tales would be derived out of the real experiences of children trying to make sense of their chaos. It has all the major themes: rescue and good fairy, bad fairy. Essentially, it has to do with coming to terms with the problem of ambivalence, love and hate, which can obviously create a civil war in each person. So given the fact that people have this by nature, how does anybody have a sense of unity, meaning a self, that can somehow tolerate the civil war that goes on in everybody? And that's really the psychological stuff behind all of these phenomena, I think, are really ways of trying to make sense out of that which is nonsensical. It also has to do with the idea of magic, and the things are bigger than your own self, and gets involved in creativity and the difference between imagination as a sort of interface between what's real and what's unreal. It's fascinating. The point being, no, I don't think we're setting kids up. I think kids are that way, and then a lot of evolvement has to do with kids gradually learning to make a differentiation for themselves between what we call really real from what is imaginative.
To the best of your knowledge, Gibbs, has any study been done on the childhood of people who claim to have been abducted? For example, was there any common thread in the child's upbringing? Were these children abused by their parents? Were they loners? Were they bullied?
when I sat in on the groups, I found that just impressionistically, and to be really fair, this is really, I don't think I was particularly, I tried to be objective, and all this stuff is impressionistic. My hunch is that a lot of these kids came out of homes in which, A, they were highly imaginative, and they often came out of homes that imagination was not exactly validated and was tended to be put down. And they often found that they were talking, crosstalk with each other, and they often wound up feeling quite weird. They were even called weird and alienated and looking for something bigger than what they got. And that I found a number of patients who I have had who have had these kinds of experiences are desperately in need of being, having empathy and being accepted unconditionally, and even if it's made up, well, they feel it's true. And then I think the key issue, whether it's actually true or not, and anybody knows it, is like anything else in life. What is the meaning of this experience to you? What do you do with it? That's the key.
Interesting. Throughout history, we've seen the same scenario played over and over and over again. The different types of deities, the different type of religious philosophies, the different beliefs in mythological creatures. Like, it seems that for every period of time, there has always been the same quest, the same, what's the word I'm looking for? The same scenarios played in and out. Here in the 21st century, it's alien abductions, UFOs.
William James, if I may,
sure,
great philosopher and psychologist, said, if you could get into the mind of a newborn, if a newborn were conscious and had words to describe reality, they would probably say something like, reality is a big blooming, buzzing confusion of sensation, and your individual job is to order your own personal chaos. We're all forced to do this. And some of us take it seriously and become philosophical and are involved in wonder and study and knowledge and scientifics and other pathways of religion. You just sort of settle for blind faith.
Yeah.
You sort of figure like, all right, here's the answer. I didn't swallow it whole, which is fine. And then you have the tension between belief and knowledge. And there are various pathways, but you can't really avoid coming to terms with we are all living in a mysterious situation. Nobody really knows where we come from. You have no idea where you're really going. I mean, all this other stuff, people, will go on a course to tell you they know exactly what's happening. Well, that's fine. That's not my experience. And if you really are honest about answering these things for yourself, then you know that there is a mystery which you try your best to try to put your hands around and make sense out of your own personal chaos.
Gibbs, we've got to take a quick break here. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. Exonation, Dr. Gibbs Williams is our special guest, www.drgibbswilliams.com, and we'll be back on the other side of this very short break. Don't go away.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Gibbs, we have about 2.5 minutes left. How can we best wrap up this segment about alien abductions?
Wouldn't it be interesting if it's really true?
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested to know, after we get over the shock of it, and of course, depending upon who the leaders are, and we have a very stark choice, it would be interesting if somebody landed in Washington, and depending upon who our leader of the moment is, they would either probably have every weapon that we have at our disposal, blasting them to pieces if we could do it, or there might be a really interesting meeting, and it would certainly make life a lot more exciting and interesting, and and expanded. From my vantage point, to be perfectly honest, I'm not really overawed by the idea. I mean, it's like, what we're really doing is talking about differences, and one's attitude to differences is the key. If you don't like differences, then you build a wall against the Mexicans coming into the United States. If you like differences, then you embrace whatever.
Yeah.
So aliens, I guess, would be radically different. That doesn't mean they're worse or better. It just means they're different. And if you tolerate difference, you embrace it, and I guess there possibly be good aliens and bad aliens, and we would just continue what we do every day anyway.
Here's another question. Are the aliens of today the angels of old time? Have we just replaced one for the other?
Well, I guess in my mind, you would have to define what you mean by angels.
Those etheric beings, the messengers of God, who watch over us, our guardian angels, Michael the warrior, and so on and so forth.
Well, that's, once again, I think here is, let me give you the bottom line.
Okay.
From my vantage point as a psychologist, I think the key question that everybody has to stumble around with, ultimately, whether you accept it or not, is answering the big question of who is my final authority. I think it's basically each person. If you wish to believe they're gods and angels and master teachers and whatever, that to me is called projected authority, in which you're saying somebody out there knows more about me than I do. And ultimately, I think that's not true. I think each person is stuck with their own selves. And there's more or less that that's true. But ultimately, it's your decision as to what you do with your life.
Hey, Gibbs, I hate to do this, buddy, but we've just run out of time. I want to thank you so much, Gibbs, for joining us. Always a great pleasure, and I look forward to the next time you join us back here in the X Zone.
Great.
Take care,
Great
my
interview.
good friend. Thanks very much, sir. X Zone Nation, Dr. Gibbs Williams has been our guest of this hour. www.drgibbswilliams.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Coming up next, Jeremiah Willett, a demonologist. The devil made me do it. I'll be back on the other side. Whatever you do, don't go away or get abducted by aliens.